She had always felt a quiet dissatisfaction in her marriage, an emptiness she couldn't quite explain. Her husband, Tom, was kind, dependable, but their connection had slowly fizzled out over the years. They had built a comfortable life together, but the spark that once burned brightly between them had long since dimmed. Then, out of nowhere, Ethan reappeared. He was her ex from college, the one who had broken her heart but also set her soul on fire. He was younger, more spontaneous, and carried a sense of freedom that she hadn't realized she craved until he walked back into her life. They had met for coffee, reminiscing about the past, sharing laughs, and before long, their conversations turned to deeper, more intimate matters. It didn't take long before their encounters became more frequent. What started as innocent catch-up sessions quickly evolved into stolen moments. She found herself drawn to Ethan in a way she hadn't felt in years. The way he looked at her, the way he made her feel like the center of his world. It reignited something inside of her that she had forgotten was even there. Tom was oblivious, wrapped up in his own routine and unaware of the slow unraveling of their marriage. Meanwhile, with Ethan, she felt alive again. Their physical connection was electric, something she hadn't experienced in so long. She knew it was wrong, but in those moments, it felt like nothing else mattered. She told herself it was temporary, that it was just a fleeting escape, but deep down, she knew she was crossing a line that couldn't easily be erased. As time went on, her guilt grew, but so did her need for Ethan. The tension between her two worlds became unbearable. She tried to convince herself that it was just a phase, but the weight of the secret started to take its toll. She couldn't stop herself from seeing him, even though she knew it was tearing her apart. One evening, after a particularly passionate encounter with Ethan, she returned home to Tom. He was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone, unaware of the storm brewing in her heart. She had never felt so far away from him. She looked at her husband and felt a pang of sadness, knowing that things could never go back to how they were. The lie she was living was growing harder to keep up, and the consequences of her actions would eventually come to light. But for now, all she could think about was Ethan and the world they shared, a world she couldn't seem to leave. The days that followed were a blur of guilt and desire. Every time she saw Tom, a tight knot formed in her chest. He seemed completely unaware of the distance that had grown between them. She would smile, laugh, and play the part of the devoted wife, but inside, she was somewhere else entirely. The conversations with Tom felt shallow, as though she were living a life that no longer fit her. Ethan, on the other hand, was always just a text away. His messages were full of warmth and affection, and they shared an undeniable connection that she couldn't deny. Sometimes they would meet for lunch, sometimes in quiet, hidden spots around the city where no one knew them. Each meeting brought a thrill, an excitement she hadn't felt in years. But with every encounter, the weight of her deception grew heavier. One evening, as she lay next to Tom in bed, her mind was a million miles away. He was asleep, his steady breathing a reminder of how easy it had been to slip into this life of routine, where everything seemed predictable. But the passion she had once felt for him had faded, replaced by a longing for something or someone else. She closed her eyes and saw Ethan's face, remembered the way he kissed her, the way his hands seemed to understand her body in a way Tom's never had. It wasn't long before the inevitable happened. One day, Tom came home early from work, his key turning in the lock before she could even straighten up from the hurriedly hidden text she was sending to Ethan. She froze, her heart racing, as she quickly locked her phone and stood up, trying to act normal. Tom walked in, smiling, his face filled with the joy of seeing her after a long day. But to her, his presence felt like an intrusion. "Hey," he said, noticing the tension in the room. "Everything okay?" She nodded quickly, masking the knot in her stomach. "Yeah, just a bit of a headache." "It's nothing." He looked at her with concern, but didn't press. He set down his things and kissed her on the cheek, oblivious to the storm inside her. As he prepared dinner in the kitchen, she couldn't shake the feeling that the truth was slipping through her fingers. She couldn't keep pretending much longer. That night, As they lay in bed, she heard Ethan's voice in her head, calling her name, reminding her of the passion she'd been missing. It was almost unbearable. Tom's arm draped over her. A gesture that once felt comforting now felt like a chain holding her to a life that no longer felt like hers. She turned away slightly, her back to him, pretending to sleep. The next morning, she couldn't stop thinking about what was happening. The double life she was leading. Was it just a thrill of cheating, or was she truly falling for Ethan again? She knew she couldn't keep this up forever. Sooner or later, the truth would surface, and when it did, everything would change. Her phone buzzed, and without thinking, she picked it up. It was a message from Ethan, a simple, "Can't wait to see you tonight." Her heart raced as she quickly typed a reply, agreeing to meet. She told herself she could manage this, that she could keep everything separate. But deep down, she knew it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. The evening she'd been dreading finally arrived. Tom went to bed early, and she, as usual, excused herself, pretending to be tired. But this time, her footsteps felt heavier, and the weight of her actions bore down on her. She quickly changed into a coat, checked the door to make sure it was locked, and slipped into the night, heading toward Ethan's. When she arrived, she found him waiting outside, his smile warm and full of that familiar, reckless energy that had always drawn her to him. But as they embraced, a sense of dread filled her chest. What had she done? She had betrayed her husband, and more importantly, she had betrayed herself. She had lost her way. The night was filled with passion, but when it ended, something in her had shifted. She no longer felt the same thrill. Instead, she was consumed by guilt. What had started as a momentary escape had turned into something much darker, and she couldn't ignore the consequences much longer. As she lay beside Ethan, staring at the ceiling, she knew that the life she'd known with Tom was slipping away, and the life she was building with Ethan, as intoxicating as it was fraught with its own dangers. She was standing at the edge of a precipice, and with each passing day, the fall seemed inevitable.